Chrysanthemum by Kevin Henkes. A chrysanthemum is a flower. These flowers are chrysanthemums. They are beautiful and delicate. This flower is a daisy. You'll be hearing about a daisy in our story. Be sure and notice when you get to this part. When a flower doesn't get enough light and water, it starts to die. It is wilted. Listen for this word, wilted, in the story today. Here are some other flowers you'll hear towards the end of our story. This is a marigold. Listen for when you hear about marigold. This is a carnation. Let's find out what all of these flowers have to do with our story by author Kevin Henkes. Chrysanthemum by Kevin Henkes. Kevin Henkes is the author of this book. He wrote the words. Chrysanthemum by Kevin Henkes. The day she was born was the happiest day in her parents' lives. "She's perfect," said her mother. "Absolutely," said her father. And she was. She was absolutely perfect. "Her name must be everything she is," said her mother. "Her name must be absolutely perfect," said her father. And it was. Chrysanthemum. Her parents named her Chrysanthemum. Did you notice what flowers are on her baby blanket? Chrysanthemum grew and grew and grew. And when she was old enough to appreciate it, Chrysanthemum loved her name. She loved the way it sounded when her mother woke her up. She loved the way it sounded when her father called her to dinner. And she loved the way it sounded when she whispered it to herself in the bathroom mirror. Chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum. Chrysanthemum loved the way her name looked when it was written with ink on an envelope. She loved the way it looked when it was written with icing on her birthday cake. And she loved the way it looked when she wrote it herself with a fat orange crayon. Chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum. Chrysanthemum thought her name was absolutely perfect. And then she started school. On the first day, Chrysanthemum wore her sunniest dress and her brightest smile, and she ran all the way. "Hooray!" said Chrysanthemum. "School!" But when Mrs. Chudd took roll call, everyone giggled upon hearing Chrysanthemum's name. These are the other friends in Chrysanthemum's class at school. Her teacher, Mrs. Chudd, Dawn, Eve, Lois, Al, Les, Kay, Max, Sue, Bill, Pat, Tom, Sam, Ken, Joe, Rita, Victoria, and Chrysanthemum. Do you see how her name doesn't fit on the picture? Is anyone else's name hanging off of the picture? It's so long, said Joe. It scarcely fits on your name tag, said Rita, pointing. I'm named after my grandmother, said Victoria. You're named after a flower. Chrysanthemum wilted. She did not think her name was absolutely perfect. She thought it was absolutely dreadful. The rest of the day was not much better. During nap time, Victoria raised her hand and informed Mrs. Chudd that Chrysanthemum's name was spelled with 13 letters. That's exactly half as many letters as there are in the entire alphabet, Victoria explained. Thank you for sharing that with us, Victoria, said Mrs. Chudd. Now put your head down. Do you think Victoria thought that was a good thing that Chrysanthemum had 13 letters or a bad thing? If I had a name like yours, I'd change it, Victoria said, as the students lined up to go home. I wish I could, thought Chrysanthemum miserably. Welcome home, said her mother. Welcome home, said her father. School is no place for me, said Chrysanthemum. My name is too long. It scarcely fits on my name tag. And I'm named after a flower. Oh, pish, said her mother. Your name is beautiful. And precious and priceless and fascinating and winsome, said her father. It's everything you are, said her mother. Absolutely perfect, said her father. Chrysanthemum felt much better after her favorite dinner, macaroni and cheese with ketchup, and an evening filled with hugs and kisses and parcheesi. That night, Chrysanthemum dreamed that her name was Jane. It was an extremely pleasant dream. Look at Chrysanthemum's face. Do you think pleasant means good or bad? Pleasant means good. The next morning, Chrysanthemum wore her most comfortable jumper. She walked to school as slowly as she could. She dragged her feet in the dirt. Chrysanthemum, 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 she wrote. She even looks like a flower, said Victoria as Chrysanthemum entered the playground. Let's pick her, said Rita, pointing. Let's smell her, said Joe. Chrysanthemum wilted. She did not think her name was absolutely perfect. She thought it was absolutely dreadful. The rest of the day was not much better. During nap time, Victoria raised her hand and said, A chrysanthemum is a flower. It lives in a garden with worms and other dirty things. Thank you for sharing that with us, Victoria, said Mrs. Chudd. Now put your head down. just cannot believe your name," Victoria said as the students lined up to go home. "Neither can I," thought Chrysanthemum miserably. Look at Chrysanthemum's face. Do you think miserably is a good thing or a bad thing? That's right, it's a bad thing. "Welcome home," said her mother. "Welcome home," said her father. "School is no place for me," said Chrysanthemum. "They said I even look like a flower. They pretended to pick me and smell me." "Oh, pish," said her mother. "They're just jealous." "And envious and begrudging and discontented and jaundiced," said her father. "Who wouldn't be jealous of a name like yours?" said her mother. "After all, it's absolutely perfect," said her father. Chrysanthemum felt a trifle better after her favorite dessert, chocolate cake with buttercream frosting, and another evening filled with hugs and kisses and parcheesi. That night, Chrysanthemum dreamed that she really was a chrysanthemum. She sprouted leaves and petals. Victoria picked her and plucked the leaves and petals one by one until there was nothing left but a scrawny stem. It was the worst nightmare of Chrysanthemum's life. Chrysanthemum wore her outfit with 7 pockets the next morning. She loaded the pockets with her most prized possessions and her good luck charms. Chrysanthemum took the longest route possible to school. She stopped and stared at each and every flower. "Chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum," the flowers seemed to say. That morning, the students were introduced to Mrs. Twinkle, the music teacher. Her voice was like something out of a dream, as was everything else about her. The students were speechless. They thought Mrs. Twinkle was an indescribable wonder. They went out of their way to make a nice impression. Mrs. Twinkle led the students in scales. Then she assigned roles for the class musical. Victoria was chosen as the dainty fairy queen. Rita was chosen as the spiffy butterfly princess. Joe was chosen as the all-important pixie messenger. And Chrysanthemum was chosen as a daisy. What do you think the kids are going to say now? Chrysanthemum's a daisy, chrysanthemum's a daisy, Joe, Rita, and Victoria chanted, thinking it was wildly funny. Chrysanthemum wilted. She did not think her name was absolutely perfect. She thought it was absolutely dreadful. "What's so humorous?" asked Mrs. Twinkle. Chrysanthemum, was the answer. Her name is so long, said Joe. It scarcely fits on her name tag, said Rita, pointing. I'm named after my grandmother, said Victoria. She's named after a flower. My name is long, said Mrs. Twinkle. It is, said Joe. My name would scarcely fit on a name tag, said Mrs. Twinkle. It would, said Rita, pointing. And, said Mrs. Twinkle, I'm named after a flower too. You are? Said Victoria. Yes, said Mrs. Twinkle. My name is Delphinium. Delphinium Twinkle. And if my baby is a girl, I'm considering Chrysanthemum as a name. I think it's absolutely perfect. Chrysanthemum could scarcely believe her ears. She blushed. She bloomed. She beamed. Chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum. Joe, Rita, and Victoria looked at Chrysanthemum longingly. Call me Marigold, said Joe. I'm Carnation, said Rita, pointing. My name is Lily of the Valley, said Victoria. Chrysanthemum did not think her name was absolutely perfect. She knew it. Overall, the class musical was a huge success. Chrysanthemum was absolutely perfect as Daisy. Victoria made the only mistake. She completely forgot her lines as the dainty fairy queen. Chrysanthemum thought it was wildly funny, and she giggled throughout the entire dance of the flowers. Eventually, Mrs. Twinkle gave birth to a healthy baby girl, and of course, she named her Chrysanthemum. I hope you enjoyed this book by author Kevin Henkes, and I hope you love the name that your parents gave you.